With over 21 million viewers,
She's done it all.
the queen of pop takes control.
She's a warrior.
Riveting, revealing, so many shocking revelations.
She's a legend.
Janet Jackson, a Lifetime documentary event for your consideration.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in the Variety streaming room for this very special presentation of the documentary Janet Jackson. My name is Angelique Jackson, senior entertainment writer at Variety, and joining me are the film's director, Benjamin Hirsch, and executive producer, Rick Murray. Hello, guys.
Nice to meet you. Are you any relation?
You know what? It's funny. Since I was about 5 years old, that has always been the question. And you guys, you really delve into so deeply what it means to have Jackson as a last name. And where for me, I was of no relation, Janet, it had various connotations on the rest of her life, good or bad or otherwise. So I guess I'll start with that first. How did you first come together with Janet initially to record this documentary, kind of as a precursor to her tour, I understand?
That's right. Well, it was all you then, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the initial contact was made by a former colleague of ours. And Janet basically reached out and wanted somebody to kind of document behind the scenes on her State of the World tour that she was doing. We obviously said that yes, we were interested, and I would love to go on tour with her and film behind the scenes. And I think she was quite interested because we've done work with Idris Elba before, so that kind of piqued her interest a little bit. But a couple of weeks later, I was then flying out to join her on her rehearsals. And that's where it kind of all started. And that's where the project started as well. It was just meant to be a behind the scenes tour film. That was all it was. But over the kind of weeks working with her, we I think quickly realized that there was something bigger that could be done here, and that she hadn't really ever told her life story. And so that was the mission that we kind of went on.
Yeah, we were talking about it before we sort of revealed the mission to Janet. We'd never heard Janet talk about being a member of the Jackson family, about what it feels like, the obviously many highs and lows that she's been through. And so Ben was sort of, you just waiting for your moment to go deeper than just talking about the tour.
Yeah.
And you didn't think it was going to happen, to be fair, at one point, did you? You called me and said, I don't think she wants to sort of go there and open up. And then after a few weeks, I got a call in the middle of the night, and Ben was saying, we just had the most amazing interview. It was 3 hours long. It was scheduled to be 30 minutes. It was 3 hours long, and we talked about everything. And it's fascinating. And there is definitely a bigger project here. And interestingly, in the final 4 parts that are going to be shown after this chat, a lot of that first interview, big interview that Ben did in 2017, is across the whole series still. It was still some of the best, most interesting, insightful moments that you got from that. Yeah, and so that interview was used in the final project, which is amazing.
Well, Ben, what was that moment like? What was that question that kind of led Janet to open up and you because you guys had built that rapport, but that moment where she's like, you know what, I trust him. Let's talk.
I don't really know if it was a specific moment, but I think it had just been maybe 2 or 3 weeks of her getting used to me just being around, and me having
your aura. She liked your aura.
Maybe it was, but it was me having the confidence just to go in there and ask those big questions. Ask about her father, ask about her brother. She just seemed to be in that place in her life where she was happy to kind of look back and reflect and answer some of these questions that maybe she hadn't necessarily spoken about ever before.
Janet's very sort of choosy on who she lets into her inner circle, as you would be if you were, grown up in the spotlight. And I think Ben it was quite a sort of softly approach, but a persistent one, wasn't it? Yeah. And I think the answer is, he probably won't say it because it sounds egotistical for Ben to say it, but she just really liked him and really warmed to him and was really happy. She doesn't open up to many people in life. She was really happy to do it with Ben, and that's testament to Ben.
What was the question you were most nervous to ask in that interview? You kind of know where you're going and you're like, how do I bring this up and maybe it'll be okay?
I think it was probably like asking about her her brother and his allegations and how that affected her. Obviously, it's a very sensitive subject, but we just wanted to get in, or I thought it was interesting to learn how it kind of affected her, regardless of, you know, whether people thought he was guilty or whether people thought he was innocent. Like, how did it affect her? Because as the film shows, it did have quite a profound effect on her.
As she says in the film, it was kind of a guilty by association, whether or not anyone did anything wrong. And that's what we talk about with the Jackson family of it all. So you do these interviews, you get 3 hours of this incredible conversation, but you also had just unprecedented access to Janet, her personal archives, the family. You know, how many hours of footage did you all ultimately capture? How many interviews made up this documentary?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I think more so it's the archive footage that we have access to that was amazing. She has something like 7,000 tapes in her archives, and we were just given free rein to all of it. She actually shipped all of those tapes and DVDs and whatever from LA to the UK, and it was actually coming to my house, because we were making this during, obviously, the pandemic, and so these tapes were all arriving at my house. And we was living in a pile of Janet Jackson's archive for about 6 months. But it was fascinating, and we had to have, you know, an amazing edit team to go through all of those tapes and, you know, find those little needles in the haystack and those little kind of diamonds in there. But as you can see in the film, there's some amazing footage in there. Yeah, and she kept absolutely everything, hadn't she? And we were, what we didn't realise when we got into it was that her second husband, Renee, who was a cameraman director, basically documented about a decade of her career, and it had never seen the light of day. It had sat there in a box in an office in LA for 20 years until it was posted to Ben, and we started looking through the tapes. And so finding that was a really magical moment. Yeah. We realised, wow, we've got we've got an entire episode just from this box of tapes, you know, which captured her at her absolute zenith in her career, recording Rhythm Nation and that sort of thing.
How did you guys decide how to structure this documentary, what to keep in, what to cut? And is there something that didn't make it in that was like devastating not to make this final 4 hours?
I think a lot of structuring it was based on those kind of initial interviews that we did with Janet and the stories that she told. And then it was obviously kind of our edit team to go away and see what footage we had. And it's like, right, we've got this amazing story where she, you know, tells of, let's say, the pressure of recording Rhythm Nation. How are we going to illustrate it? And then, you know, you come across this footage of, you know, an argument in the studio, and it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. We can work with that scene now. Like another example is where she's talking about her proposal, when Renee proposed to her, and we uncovered this footage of them in Hawaii and the actual moment where, you know, he gives her the ring, and it's just amazing footage. And so obviously a lot of the archive dictated what went into the film. I don't think there was anything that we didn't get in that we really felt like the reason, because of the order it happened, and not all TV shows and documentaries work in this order. Quite like usually you would look at all your footage and then go and interview the protagonist and say, can you talk about this? Because I've got footage of this. But actually, we had to do it. Just had to be done the other way around. By the time we got the archive, she was done with her interviews, and we were in lockdown. And so it is exactly as Ben says, we were hunting for footage that told the story. And that proposal, she describes it perfectly. We were on a beach, we were in Hawaii, and then suddenly we've got this tape marked Hawaii, and we're like, hold on, they didn't film the proposal. And it's there. And when you watch it, you think we'd done it the more traditional way of finding the footage and then asking her about it. It didn't work like that. I think there are loads of things on the cutting room floor, certainly from that decade, the late 80s to the sort of late 90s, where we had so much footage. And some of it was debating with Janet as well, who, by the way, thinks that most of her life is boring. Yeah. She'd say, I just think it's all boring, guys. I mean, like, Janet, no one's seen this before. This is amazing. We could watch it for hours. And, you know, behind the scenes on, again, when she's working with Renee, the music video, the director, and she's like, oh, I just don't really see why. This is fascinating. This is an iconic moment that we're seeing unpacked for the first time. So some of it was convincing her to keep it as well, wasn't it? You know.
Absolutely. What were, I mean, you kind of gave us a taste just now, but what were some of those conversations like? Because Janet is an executive producer on this documentary. So this isn't one where, you guys go and make the final cut and she doesn't know what is happening. This is a real collaboration where you're, working together a bit more to decide how this is presented.
It was just really collaborative, wasn't it, from the start? And I think with something like this, it has to be, if you're going to do, in this day and age, a proper all-access biography on someone, it's going to be authorised, they're going to want to be involved, and especially creative like Janet and an icon like Janet. She wants to have a say in her story, right? So that felt absolutely acceptable to us in terms of being able to make this project and get our hands on the amazing archive and work with her. And actually, it was a really fun process because she, in a very creative way, wanted to make it feel very distinctly Janet. So Terry Lewis was our music, and Jimmy Jam were our music supervisors. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the music they went into their sort of archive of old tracks that they'd done for their albums, and we pulled out stems from old albums and created compositions from them. The title music is a remix of Control. So there are all these lovely touches and Easter eggs in there that if we'd gone off and just done our thing as producers and the director, you wouldn't have had those in without her involvement. So there's a wonderful creative layer to it. And then, of course, there's a sort of personal thing for her, that these are all her personal relationships. And so getting the sort of tone right of how she felt about certain people in her life, whether it's her brother or her ex-husbands, we worked with her on that so that it was accurate and it wasn't just our opinion, because we weren't there. And this is very much marketed as this is her telling her story. So she had to be part of the process because it's coming from her mouth. It's not our view of her story.
Well, and you made that point earlier as well, that we haven't gotten a chance really ever to hear Janet tell her story. It's always been other people speaking for her or the tabloids saying what was going on in her life. And this is really her first opportunity to kind of lay it all bare. And she went all in by giving you all such access. In addition to kind of the sit-down interviews, you also traveled with Janet to the family home, also to Vegas, where they performed, where she really got her start. What did that add for you? Was there somewhere you planned to go that you weren't able to before, production all kind of changed with COVID? It
was amazing. I mean, being on tour with her is amazing in itself because, I mean, her and her entire team are such, consummate professionals. And I think that was part of my worry at first. It was like, you're looking for the drama in it. And actually somebody who's been doing it for so many years, there isn't really any drama in touring because she's got it down. She can absolutely nail it. But it was such a kind of magical moment getting to go to that house where they grew up. And actually more so seeing Gary, the town where they grew up in, and the kind of poverty there, because it just brings it all home that they really came from nothing. That's a story which is pretty well told, I think. To actually go there and experience it and see it with your own eyes is pretty kind of fascinating.
And she hadn't been back there, had she, for many years?
Yeah, she was maybe 8 the last time she went there, but she couldn't really remember it. And so it was really kind of emotional for her as well.
Well, it's interesting when she goes home because I think at a certain point when you have such like a mythology around a family, some of this seems like, oh, it must be exaggerated. The house couldn't have been that small. The street couldn't have been named after couldn't have been named Jackson Street. Some of this has to be, legend. And in fact, it was all very, very real.
Yeah. And I, having been in that house, I still can't quite comprehend how they all fitted in that house, but somehow they did. And it's, as you say, it's fascinating, that rise from that tiny house and having very little to the superstars that the entire family are today.
It's a well-told story, but people forget about that part of it, and it is the most impressive part of it. It's an amazing American kind of, zero to hero story, and also to be a family of colour from Gary at that time. The odds were stacked against them in terms of getting into show business, and that really is sort of English people who we're sort of slightly detached from it, but also I think that enabled us to sort of look at it as well from a very zoomed out perspective and sort of tell that story again, hopefully through through fresh eyes in the editing of it as well.
Yeah.
Staying on the track about the family, so much of this documentary explores Janet's relationship with her father, with Joe Jackson, and it traces it from, the very beginning as he brings her into this life as an entertainer through his passing just a few years ago. How did that real relationship, that arc, kind of shape this story?
I think it was quite an important arc, and it was one that actually, it felt like Janet was only kind of realizing that as we were interviewing her and developing the kind of overall narrative arc. But yeah, I think it was quite an important aspect of her life, I think, because it went on not only to shape her professional career, but also I think it had some sort of effect in her romantic relationships that she had with people as well. It's an important relationship for her, and it's not one that has always been positive for her, but it's had its highs and lows, I think. And
and Ben's right. Things changed as we filmed. When we started filming, Joe was alive, and Ben filmed with Joe. And actually, you talk about sequences that we didn't manage to shoot. This wasn't because of COVID, but we planned and arranged for Joe and Janet to meet. And we were going to play some of the family footage, some of the old family footage from when they were young, and shoot them enjoying that footage together and talking about old times as part of her journey to sort of reconcile things with her father. But unfortunately, he was ill. He got ill and he passed away. So it was really sad that we weren't able to do that. But I do think that the films and Ben has sort of captured those moments and that sort of change of, because her album Control was about her taking control back from her father in the 80s, and so that is very much the whole spine of this series.
As a viewer watching it, you do kind of wonder, could she have been so open if they weren't kind of in this place of reconciling? Maybe she wouldn't have been. It may have been a little more guarded. It seems like she was, as you mentioned, kind of in this place of just looking back at things with new eyes, also because she is a mother now and, has that part of her legacy kind of moving forward. It sometimes is easier to look back. Talk to me a little bit about capturing Janet as a mom and really allowing her to open up about that for, what is really the first time.
I think you're totally right. The fact that because when I first started filming with her, I think her son was probably 6 months old, and the fact that she was a new mom did help her to open up and look. She was looking forward to where she was going to be in the future as a new mom, but also she was looking back to her childhood and things that happened in her childhood. So I think that new relationship she had with her son really allowed her to open up and want to explore some of these themes that we explore in the documentary. But I mean, capturing Janet as a mom was just lovely. She's a really, really hands-on mom. And there were some times when she was rehearsing when she would just be spending time with her son, and I'd be like, she's not getting much rehearsal time in here because she's so busy with her son. Is this show going to be all right? But she's just like a mum like everybody else is. And I think that's another reason, I had become a dad, a couple of months after, and I think that's another reason why she opened up to me, because we both had this kind of new parents thing that we could bond over and talk about.
Issa was on, he's basically knocking around while they were rehearsing. He'd be on his little, I don't know what you call it.
A little stroller.
Just bouncing around while they were rehearsing their dance moves. And I also, just to add to what Ben said, I remember her saying, this didn't go into the final series, but in the footage when you were talking to her, she said to you that, she's starting to think about this as a bigger project. I want to create something that I can show to my son when he's older. And so that kind of just gives you an insight really into her motivation for doing it. She wanted to create a record of her life, of the highs, of the lows, and that's something that when he's older, hopefully he'll watch as well.
Yeah.
What was the most emotional part of filming this documentary? I mean, it does go through the highs and the lows of Janet's career, her personal life. There's a sensitivity there, when you kind of know when to, stop pushing. What were some of the challenges of really going there with some of these topics that hadn't been discussed before, things even like the Super Bowl, for example?
I think, well, for me, like the most emotional bit of the interview that we did was definitely when she's talking about the passing of her brother, because obviously that was an incredibly difficult time for her. And you know, it's that whole thing of, you know, he'd had these allegations against him. You know, some people say one thing about him, some people say another. But at the end of the day, you know, he was her brother. It was incredibly hard for her to lose him, I think. You know, throughout the film, she talks about how close they were, how her and Randy and Michael were the three amigos. And so it was incredibly emotional for her to talk about that and open up about, you know, the passing of Michael.
Basically, it went as far as it was going to go, but also that you know, I think that's sort of, you know, that you had that relationship with her where she would openly say to you that that's enough now. Yeah. Like I've been there, and I've you know, and also amazing that given we were collaborating with her, then we kept all those moments in. We hit every single beat that people know, whether it's a controversial beat or a happy beat. You know, we just tried to hit it all and tell the whole story.
Speaking about Michael for a second, and then I do want to talk a little bit more about the structure, how you divided up these 4 hours. What I found to be interesting about this conversation was also how it showed the kind of ebbs and flows of their relationship, the moments when they were really close, the moments, you know, around Thriller, she talks about where it seemed like they became distant. I wasn't sure if it was, you know, everything around him kind of pulled him away. You know, how did you kind of reconcile how that relationship affected her relationship to fame as well? Kind of watching her brother go through all of these things. How did that kind of relate to the way she then went through her highs and lows as a performer?
I think everything in the series, we try to we tell it through her lens. So whenever we're looking at Michael, it's her interactions with Michael, or the effect things that Michael was going through had on her. And there was a long period that we talk about in the documentary where they weren't in touch very much, and it started with Thriller and it went through the 90s really, and then performing Scream and recording Scream together really was them coming back together. But it was different. They had all this sort of different mileage under their belts, and it wasn't so much like old times. And you had record companies and people around them trying to sort of pull them apart in different ways. And so I think it had a profound effect on her relationship with her brother, and her relationship with the men in her life in general. I think have a profound effect on Janet, and I think that her relationships, whether they're her family relationships or love, that is the ongoing theme. To start answering your structure question. The 4 episodes really are about the different relationships in her life, whether that's a relationship with her father, a relationship with her brother, and the sort of romantic relationships that they had. And although we are charting chronologically across 4 hours her career, so we're starting from her as a child performer and we're ending now in episode 4, actually what happens in her career, and it's not written like this because it's real life, is that each of those sort of decades almost, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then the sort of now, is that you have different relationships that shape those decades, and very different types of music as well in each decade. So I think you get 4 very sort of almost unique films, distinct films from the series, and it had that, when we started digging in, it just had that natural shape to it. The episode 4 where you see her, there's a lot more verite in that because it's based now, and it has a lot more of Ben's filming of her being a mother, and obviously the first episode where we started in the 70s, it's all old Motown footage, archive, Vegas, Dick Clark, all that kind of stuff. So they feel so different as well, you know, the 4 episodes.
All right. So as you have all combed through this footage, talked through things with Janet, you get to the final edit. And how did you present it to her first? And then were you watching alongside, or did she see it separately? How did you all decide to kind of make that final presentation of this documentary?
And by the way, I'd love it if it was just a final presentation. There were many final presentations.
Many, yeah.
And everyone that works with Janet does say that she's a stickler, and she really is. She has a real eye for detail. She likes things to be absolutely perfect, visually, audibly, and very sort of sculpted.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of viewings, didn't we, Ben?
Yeah. But I think, she was involved collaboratively, like throughout the process, throughout it. So we were constantly sharing stuff with her, and she would be constantly feeding back, right up until it went out on TV.
And what was wonderful about the relationship was she never, ever said to us, sorry, guys, I don't want that, or you can't have that. Or, the collaboration, there were never any orders.
Yeah.
There was just, can I see it again? Can we talk about that?
Could we try this?
What do you think? Can we try that? Okay. And so, and that's how you want a collaboration and a relationship to work. It wasn't it wasn't a sort of master and slave scenario. It was very much one based on mutual respect, especially for you, Ben, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And she certainly had that understanding that, she had to talk about those difficult things in her life. She knew that it couldn't just be watered down and all positive and all praise. She knew that she had to kind of go there and talk about all of these things.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about the first time that you sent her like a full string out of the documentary. Was it something? Well, because you mentioned the pandemic, was it something where you sent her a link and she was able to pull it up and watch at home, or how did that process work?
We sent her a link, didn't we? And we sent Randy as well, who's her brother and manager, who's sort of also an EP on the project and very involved. So they both got a link, and I think we just waited for feedback, which took a while to begin with because they were very busy, weren't they? So we were like, oh, we haven't heard anything. It must be fine. And actually, when we actually then heard back from them a couple of weeks later, they were super happy. They were super happy. But that's when the work started, isn't it?
Yes.
Obviously, we'd already sort of shared it between ourselves a lot and got it to a point where we felt really confident with it. Then we bring Janet and Randy in, and then we've got a whole new process beginning then to sort of experiment with things, change all the music change, because obviously they're musicians, so we were never going to get the music right for them. And I think there were some pieces that we really wanted to keep in, that we felt lifted scenes, but a lot of that's when Terry and Jimmy then came in, and so there was so many more exciting parts of the process from our first viewing.
Well, I imagine that first time, I'm glad it was 2 weeks, because I imagine those first 4 hours, you're just pacing back and forth. And then you're like, okay, we're not getting an answer today, so let me go on.
So we had so much to do anyway. So I think we sent the first cut off, and then we moved on to the next one. So we were nervously waiting to hear what they thought.
Well, it all worked out beautifully. And in that sense, what is each of your favorite segments from this film? I know it's really hard to kind of choose between all of these things, but even if it's something you just were emotionally attached to, or something that surprised you to learn, something that you'll kind of take with you as the experience of having created this documentary.
I think for me, it's that moment in the second episode where she finally finds success when she writes Control. There's a real kind of turning point in the film where she collaborates with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis for the first time. She collaborates with Paula Abdul. And it's just a really lovely moment in the film where you see her kind of turn into this pop star, a real pop star. And then she walks out on stage and performs Control. And it's just a really kind of uplifting and positive moment. That's, I think, my favourite bit.
They're rehearsing, aren't they? Her and Paula. Yeah. For me, it's difficult to pick, but I think it's probably the moment I mentioned earlier where we got sent some reels of film, and it was the behind-the-scenes documentary of them making the Again video, which was the video that her husband directed. And you get to see in that, there's some quite funny moments in it. They had a guy, very muscly, half-naked guy called Gary, whose job it was to basically kiss and undress Janet. And then when you're watching it, knowing that the dynamic here is that's her husband directing it, and you're seeing the dynamic coming out between them, of them kind of egging each other on to go a bit further with this video shoot. And I just think it really brought to life Janet in the creative process, and also gave you an amazing insight into their relationship, because going back to 1992, or what I think it was, nobody actually knew they were in a relationship then. So he was there directing that shoot, and they're like, oh, there's the director, there's Gary undressing Janet. But when you go back and watch all the behind the scenes footage and you know they're married, it's a completely new experience. And so finding that it was all beautifully shot on film and never seen before, I think was really special and exciting for me.
Yeah.
And the best part of that was, among the people who didn't know that he was her husband was Gary. And
Gary had no idea that he was undressing the director's wife in front of his very eyes.
But gratefully, Janet did tell him. She clued him in on that, so he wasn't in the dark forever. But those are just some of the nuggets that you were all able to uncover in this incredible 4-part documentary, Janet Jackson. And for you, the Variety Streaming Room audience, that documentary will be playing now. So tune in for that, click over and enjoy this insider look at one of the most iconic figures in music. Thank you so much to Rick Murray and Benjamin Hirsch for unpacking this documentary with me, and enjoy, everyone.